what's your good advice for when a tenant calls up and says, I got mold? How do you recommend landlords respond to that?
Sure. Devin, I'll give my piece first.
Yeah.
We see this all the time. We don't like it, but unfortunately we find ourselves in the middle of these landlord tenants disputes a lot, and it can get pretty heated sometimes. And we're kind of like the man in the middle and the arbitrator in some cases. But what I've noticed the most common is the tenants, they get most upset, not necessarily at the mold, but at like the attitude of the landlord. Like if the landlord is very aggressive and like kind of instantly blames the tenant and you're sloppy and this and that, and then they like don't even do anything about the problem for several weeks, that creates this tremendous amount of resentment in the tenant, and things can escalate very quickly from there. So and that's never good. I don't know. What I've seen is that like usually these tenants win. I mean, they have a lot of the laws, written to back up the tenant. And the tenant, if they decide not to pay rent, that's a really bad situation. Like you kind of want to keep the tenant happy from what I've seen. And that means basically the landlord being responsive. Like, okay, the tenant calls, hey, there's a mold problem. Okay, don't just blow the guy off for 3 weeks. Say, okay, I'm sorry to hear that. Let me come check it out. And you be there within a day or two, take some pictures, you want to be collecting some evidence. And then, maybe they can clean it up themselves, the landlord. Or if they, maybe they hire somebody, but don't wait too long, because like I said, the tenants, they get up all these, they freak out. Then they start Googling mold on the internet. Like the quicker, the better, that's my advice. Act quickly.
Do something better than trying to figure out the perfect solution is what I heard there.
Yeah. Devin, you got anything else to add on that, or?
Man, we had quite a few units. I remember those days, and the key is to be available and responsive and show you care. And I think, most people are reasonable, but, you just have to be on top of it. The ones that are, it's always, when we get the call from the landlord, we know the situation, okay, this is a responsible landlord usually. When we get the call from the tenant, it usually means that the landlord hasn't done anything, and that's when there's a problem. So, just be on top of it and be communicative with the tenants. And remember, it's going to be, if there is a mold problem, it's going to be caused by a water problem. And the tenant is probably dealing with this for the first time, and they don't know anything about mold. And they probably think, if they've got kids, they're probably really concerned because they're thinking they're probably reading these things on the internet that are not true. So that, it's good to have some basic knowledge and be able to have to be able to explain it to them, but to be very proactive so you're not ignoring them. No one likes to be ignored, right? So that's the main advice. Be on top of it.